von Braun realized he was having this amazing second life. He had spent most of his time in Germany trying to talk his superiors into recognizing that they actually had the means for a space program if they wanted to pursue it. And he was getting himself in a lot of trouble for it. He was regularly arrested, he was put on trial. He used to say whenever he was congratulated for a good V2 strike, yes, but we're hitting the wrong planet. And he just got nowhere there. Now that he was in America, he thought maybe since he was getting nowhere with the administration, perhaps there was another way to go. And he had been inspired by something else that he saw happen just before the war. And that was the promotion for the 1939 New York World's Fair. This is an event where science was sold to the public as the future that you are going to be a part of, so you had better figure out how it works. Come and learn, come and be educated. The world of tomorrow was the subline of the 1939 World's Fair. And boy, it truly was that. People would go and line up for hours at industrial centers where they would be taught how they were going to be very, very careful drivers, all in line on automatic highway systems in the future, and how every home would be just filled with plastic pals who were fun to be with. And von Braun was inspired by this because the public was inspired by it. Everyone came out of the 1939 World's Fair, television was introduced there. They came out kind of bored with the mundane reality that they were wandering back into as war clouds were burgeoning and automobile sales and manufacturing was dropping off, and it was just an unpleasant world out there. Von Braun decided he was going to do exactly the same thing. He was going to publicize this. He was going to go public. The first thing he did was wrote a book called The Mars Project, which actually would indicate how we would ultimately achieve Mars landings. This was in the very early actually the late 40s, when he wasn't allowed to do anything interesting. He sat in White Sands and wrote this book. Very few people read it, but he also noticed that other science fiction writers were getting in on the act. One of them was Robert Heinlein, who in 1949 wrote a book called Rocket Ship Galileo, also worth checking out if you haven't read it. What's neat about Rocket Ship Galileo is it proposes that governments are terrible at running space programs. Private industry is the only way they can actually move forward. Governments are great at paving highways. They're not who you want to run your trucking company. And in 1949, Heinlein wrote a book that basically laid out his plan and suggested that private industry would take over, which is where we're at now. It only took 60 years or so, but we managed to get there. So von Braun took another step. He linked up with an old friend from the VFR, Willy Ley, and the great space artist Chesley Bonestell, and started writing articles for magazines like Look and Collier's, which would lay out in beautiful pictorial form how this would work. Bonestell started designing movies like this one, Conquest of Space by George Pal. They started doing paintings together of fleets over Mars. Von Braun became Mr. Rocket on TV. He became the go-to guy for the news networks, etc., to explain how this was going to work and where we were going to go. You couldn't open a newspaper without seeing von Braun posing awkwardly with 50s era school kids, posing awkwardly with this fellow, Walt Disney. When Disney, in 1954, was developing his first amusement park, Disneyland, he had two interesting problems. He needed to know how to publicize the darn thing, so he went to ABC and said, I will give you a free show. I'll give you an hour a week, and I'll do film. You'll have clips of films we've been doing, adventure, Davy Crockett, Frontier, wonderful fantasy stuff, in exchange for which I want to call it Disneyland, and we're going to publicize the heck out of our amusement park. And ABC signed on and said, fantastic, we love the idea. So the series Disneyland was born, which left Disney with his second problem. What was he going to do about the quarter of the park and the quarter of the series called Tomorrowland? He didn't have a clue. So the first guy he wanted to meet was Wernher von Braun, who basically exposed him to the wonderful world of the future and, in essence, designed Tomorrowland at the park, as well as was the man directly responsible for three rather astonishing specials on the Disneyland Sunday evening TV series, the Tomorrowland specials. We as kids, yeah, I'm that old, we're sitting around and waiting desperately for them. We had Adventureland specials, we had Frontierland, we had Fantasyland. God, they were the worst. No, Tomorrowland. When are they doing a Tomorrowland? Well, finally they did. They did three of them. Man into Space, Trip to the Moon, and On to Mars. Three different specials, one of which ran on my birthday. It was pretty thrilling. So Werner, in essence, became this guy, Mr. Space. That said, I want to show you a little clip about Werner, which I think you'll find interesting. This is also from the Rocket Science series. And there it is. So let's just carry my hand over to where it wants to be, and much of what I've just said rather haltingly is probably expressed more eloquently here, along with a little clip from Tom Lehrer.